My name is Kerry Newman. I am the director of Baylor University Press, one of the co-sponsors of this lecture today. The other co-sponsor is the Institute for the Studies of Religion, and both the press and the ISR, the Institute for the Studies of Religion, have significant conversations going on with China, and in particular, Renmin University in China. As I've teased our guest today, we've said to her that Renmin is the Baylor of China, or that Baylor is the Renmin of the U.S. It's very hard to distinguish, but it's a remarkable conversation that's been going on between our faculty and our institutions over the past few years. We have several people to thank for this kind of a conversation. Several are here among us. I can speak to David Jeffrey, our distinguished professor here in Great Text and Humanities, and also Dan Williams in the Religion Department, Mike Beatty in the Philosophy Department, have all had time in China and at Renmin in particular. Our guest today is from Renmin University, and she has a distinguished career. There's very little that our guest has not done. If you look at her bio in the sheet that was handed to you on the way in, you'll discover that she, like you, has been a student, and been a student for a large chunk of her life. She's studied, she's been in and out of academic institutions as a student. She holds undergraduate degrees, a master's degree. She's been to theological seminary and holds a PhD in literature. She has been a teacher as well. She's taught all along the food chain of education, undergraduates and secondary schools. She is a translator. She can translate from Chinese into English and renders scholarship into readable form. She is a wonderful leader within her own institution, an executive and an administrator who's depended upon by the very highest authorities within Renmin. But today she's with us in her capacity as a scholar. Zhang Xing, Kathy, as we know her here, is a student of Christianity in China. And today she is going to talk to us about Christianity and Chinese culture, past, present, and future. She comes to us to talk on Chinese Christianity at a time in which Christianity in China is facing some of the most interesting questions and possibilities at the very moment that China is looking at Christianity with the same sort of remarkable questioning. So I know you will hear her gladly. And I want to say as well that she had a huge hand in a book that we just published by one of, I guess you could call him your boss, your provost at Renmin, Yang Huilin's book, China, Christianity, the Question of Culture, which is not too far from Kathy's talk among us today. She was the translator, organizer, and editor, and refused any nameplate recognition. So that shows you something of her Christian humility at the very same time. But I know that you're eager to hear her, and we'll give her a warm Baylor welcome as she comes to talk to us today.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Dr. Kerry and Professor Jeffrey and Williams and Daniel and all the friends here. It's a great honor and a privilege for me to finally make my trip to Baylor after knowing so many professors from Baylor and also working with Baylor Press, our university press, for so long time. And today, my topic is Christianity and Chinese culture. You will think that we say that the history, the presence of the Christianity in China has been more than 1,000 years. If we date it back to 635, this is the Nestorian tablet. You see them. And now, the numbers of Christian members in China, some say 100 million, and some say 70 or 60 million. Anyway, it's a huge number. And China has been one of the most dynamic places for the growth of Christianity. And then, actually, all this happened only after 1980s, the fast growth and the rapid growth of the numbers. And many people asked, why? And you couldn't help wondering why. And I think my own story about my conversion, I'm a Christian, I was baptized in 2001, maybe serve as a kind of background. I was raised in a family, a very typical Chinese family. My father is a pious communist, used to be a party secretary of a large mine. And my mother, when she was working, she pursued communist ideas and tried her best to be a communist member, but only succeed doing so at the end of her career. But as soon as she was retired, and she became a Buddhist member, a believer. When I was young, I was told many stories, the Taoist stories and Buddhist stories about ghosts and gods. So I was not an atheist, but I'm not also a kind of person that is easy to be convinced. I'm kind of modernist belief, and I have a very strong nerve of being rational. I'm afraid of being superstitious. And then I have been through the education, my college and my master degree, and I have a lot of chances to get in touch with Christianity. I have the Bible study story classes and ended up with weird names. And also I did a bibliography and a dictionary for my professor. And I did the M, many names, Christian names. Nothing made any sense to me. On the contrary, whenever I write papers related to Christianity, I would end it that, yes, it is a great pity that great scientists like Newton or great poet like T.S. Eliot, they turn to theology at the end of their life. Or this, we think that for a kind of mindset, we were trained in that way. It's that it is unthinkable, or it is very hard why they turned that way. While I was in this kind of a process, and I actually rode my bicycle every day, passing a church on my way, I never realized that it is a church, and it's a living church, until I was baptized, or until I worked for the Christian church. I served at the church as an interpreter. And it was the time, although I was not a believer, and they welcomed me and said that we don't need you to be a believer to work for us. That gives me a lot of comfort. I don't want anybody to force me. And a lot of Chinese will be like that. If you press them too much, they will reject it. And street evangelizer never work. People think you are crazy. And even you are very rhetorical, and you can argue very long and very effectively. People think that, yeah, you're just good at talking. And this chance to work for the church actually gives me a chance to read the Bible by myself and carefully. And the purpose for me to read the Bible and go into the church actually is just to do my work well, because I was the interpreter. I want to do a good job. Then I read books about explaining, until I read one sermon by Bishop K.H. Ting, talking about the cosmic Christ. Then I started to be serious about this Christian faith, because that cosmic Christ assured me that Christianity is not exclusive. All the beauty, truth, and love comes from God, and different religions bears the witnesses or marks of that truth, beauty, and goodness. So this cosmic Christ bears everything. It's the origin of all this. I don't need to exclude or get rid of my previous education or my interest, because I was interested in Buddhism for a long time. I read books and Taoism as well. And I tried to find peace in those religions, but I could not sustain, the peace couldn't sustain in my heart. So I don't need to get rid of them. in order to embrace my Christian faith. So that sermon comforted me, and that's make difference. So I studied to read the Bible carefully and until I was baptized a year later. So my conversion, actually, it is because of beautiful witnesses I've been seeing in my life. Very close Christians around me, they are behaving like Christ. I saw Christ in them. And also because of this kind of inclusiveness, of this kind of theology that gives me a kind of space to embrace or to integrate everything I have. And also it is because that it is the pursuit in my heart, the thirst for love, for wisdom, and for goodness, and for peace that brings me to the faith. I share my conversion story for one purpose. There are a group of Christians or seekers like me in China who never heard about gospel before they approach Christianity for wisdom, peace, truth, or spiritual need. They are not atheists, but they are also rational, critical, suspicious, and they are seeking with honesty. They are attracted by Christianity for various reasons, but they basically do not want to get rid of their rational thinking. Some of them do not go to church or even have not been baptized, but they have great interest in Christianity and a great sympathy. And they have the experience of being touched by Holy Spirit. You can't judge them that they are not call themselves Christians, that they do not have religious experience. And so this is my story. I want to say is that Christianity is growing so fast. We were talking about that, the difference between, Carrie asked me a question, that difference between American church and Chinese church, the one single sentence or something. And somebody suggests that maybe it is because there are more Christians in China who are coming from a non-Christian background, like me. Think of 1949, the registered number of the church members, Protestants, 70,000. And now, I have said, 70 million. So most of them are coming from the background that it is truly not a Christian background. And I know that Baylor University has now about 300 Chinese students. And many of them have been loved, welcomed, embraced, and taken good care of by Christians here. And they are changed. I serve in the church near Renmin University. We have an English fellowship, and it houses more than 1,000 people every Sunday. And many of them are young and highly educated people. And they are those who have been abroad, coming back to China, and they all got baptized when they were studying here. Back, Chinese Christianity, actually the situation is very complicated. Even it is a fast growth, and it is very prosperous. There are many issues and many tensions, and there always been, still, for majority of Chinese, Christianity is still a foreign religion. It's alien. For typical Chinese mindset, they think if you're a Buddhist believer, Taoist believer, okay, fine. But you say you are a Christian, they think that you believe in a foreign God. And for them, it's just unthinkable. However, Daniel Bayes, the book, A New History of Christianity in China, he claims that in the kingdom of this post-Western Christianity, China may contribute something out of the treasure trove of her own rich Christian history. It is true. The world looking at China, especially with this fast growth of Christianity at the membership, they hope that China can contribute to this world's Christianity. And what can China contribute, and how? So my talk today, when I say Christianity and Chinese culture, I try to say that it is true, there are always conflicts and tension between these two cultures. However, when these two cultures encounter each other, something has happened. This interaction is both sides. We have to say that by encountering Chinese culture, Christianity has been changed. So is Chinese culture. This interaction, there were attempts, in these encounterings, the people try to make sense, and also there are attempts to both comprehension and misapprehension. But we can't judge with a very simple criteria that it is good or bad. The changes in both cultures actually are insurmountable. And then, if we can take this change in a good way, actually it will nurture the culture. So today I want to present this issue, this kind of tension and conflicts between Christianity and Chinese culture through a case study of 3 Chinese Confucian scholars. These scholars may tell us how Christian culture and Chinese culture have been interacting with each other and how the result of such an interaction might differ from our expectations. But before I go on, I will say something about the basic ideas about Chinese culture. First, the idea of heaven and the will of heaven. See, when people, if something bad happened, they say it's the will of heaven. They will accept it. And the emperors will say that it is the will of the heaven, that they are the emperors. So that gives them the authority. Heaven is something Chinese refuse to define. We call it Tian, but however, it's a very vague idea. But it is definitely sure something above and higher than human understanding. And ancestors are important, and especially the honoring system, tradition of ancestors are very important. And you have to honor them all the time. I mean, in a special time, because that takes the heritage and tells who you are. And besides the idea of heaven, and also there is another important thing, is the Confucius, the figure Confucius. His influence to China is huge, and you can never remove it from it. Confucius' teaching helps with the social order, and especially after it became a kind of state ideology. But all scholars agree that Confucius is different from Confucianism, or the kind of official Confucianism. It's similar to Christianity when we say that Jesus saying is different from religion, or Christian as an institutional religion. Books are important too. And actually we revere the words, written words, to a very great extent, that written words have more power. So that is one of the reasons that the Jesuits in Ming Dynasty, they write books. And also early Protestant missionaries, they wrote this kind of 3 San Zi Jing, these 3 word analects to teach. And the idea of Tai Chi, and actually in China for a long time, the 3 religions, we call them 3 in 1, the Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism mingled together. They coexist together in peace. However, actually, all of them have to be a kind of compromising theology or compromising ideas so that they can survive. So state and the religion, the relationship between state and the religion is always that religion cannot be a threat to the state. If so, banned, or you just been kicked out. The Taiji idea is also very interesting. From the picture, you can see that it's also our mindset, that this vagueness, actually. So sometimes you will find that Chinese people are very, in a good word, you think that they're kind and nice. In a bad sense, it means that they're sophisticated. They never tell you what they think. And this is because this kind of fluidity. And they don't want to. So for me, actually, when I think of God, Christian God, I refuse to take it into a very specific human image. So for me to think that God cannot be confined to a pronoun he, that's very natural. It can't be. So it's also because of this taiji, it's the black and the white, they have each other. And it's kind of interaction that generates the new things, new being. Now to my point, the Confucians, Christian scholar. Still some backgrounds. It is, so when Christianity came to China, the missionaries faced these features. I have explained very briefly about the Chinese features of our cosmology and the social order. If they handle it rightly, they were successful. Otherwise, they tend to be banned. So 635, we have the Nestorian tablets. The Nestorians came to China in Tang Dynasty, welcomed by the emperors and officials, but banned because they were so similar to the Buddhist temple. They used the Buddhist words to translate the sutras. And then in Yuan Dynasty, they also came, but it's only linked with the imperial force. So they were just didn't leave anything. And now in Ming Dynasty, it makes some change. And it is because of Matteo Ricci. Matteo Ricci is very different from other missionaries. He's a genius in language. So he learned Chinese very quickly and very well. He reads traditional Chinese well. And he's the one who translated the 4 books, 四书, into Latin. And that actually influenced the Enlightenment in Europe. So that's the way I said the Christianity encountering with Chinese culture also influenced the European history, actually. Matteo Ricci's philosophy or strategy is to respect, to receive, then to give. So this mission, this strategies later was so criticized by some his folks and also the Franciscans, being a kind of compromising or inculturation. However, it is because of his effort. He made friends with the high intellectuals in China. Because remember, in the 17th century, China was still quite powerful in many things. And Chinese scholars actually has very good confidence in their own knowledge and cosmology. And Matteo Ricci's interaction with those officials made great difference. And also because of these written things. So there are 3, you see the picture, these 3 scholars, we call them the 3 pillars of Catholic Church in Ming Dynasty. And everybody knows Xu Guangqi in China. Everybody knows that, Xu Guangqi. And even you are not a Christian, you know Xu Guangqi because it's in our history book. And he can be remembered is because he's a scientist. And we only mention that he's a scientist. We never mention his Catholic background. But today, because Xu Guangqi and Li Zizao, another one, who's more interested in astronomy, and Xu Guangqi translated many math books, maps, and a lot of things. And they apologize for the Christian faith, but they didn't write much. But Yang Tingyun, this scholar, who wrote a lot and systematically. So we treated him as the first theologian in Chinese church. He's a very interesting guy. He was raised in a Buddhist family, a very pious Buddhist family, and he's passed all the state examinations. So even go to Beijing to pass the imperial examination, and finally the Jingshi. It's not very easy. So, and also he has been appointed as a high official. And he met Matteo Ricci in 1600, but was not baptized until 1611, when he witnessed another scholar of these 3 who went back because they are living in the same town, who had the funeral for his father in Christian way. he was quite surprised. So he talked with the missionaries, and 1 year later he was baptized. See, scholars like this is very interesting. They were trained in a Confucian way. And these three scholars, three of them, they are very familiar with the contemporary Confucianism. At that time, it is the newer Confucianism. And they, as Zhu Xi, Wang Yangming, were quite influential. And they're familiar with that. And they have tried other religions, Buddhism, so for instance. And then they come back and become a Christian. So they have known these different religions, and they know what they are looking for. So he was, at that time, there are kind of sad events happened because other Confucian scholars, like in Nanjing, the governor there, was very angry and think that Christianity is a threat to Confucianism. So they caught the missionaries, put them in prison. And it is Yang Tingyun and Xu Guangqi, the three, they used their political power and helped the missionaries. So for Yang Tingyun, basically we can say that he's using Confucian language to describe and explain Christian ideas. He agrees with Matteo Ricci that we can use Christianity to supplement or Confucianism and then to replace Buddhism, replace Buddhist dominant influence in China. And he was criticized, Yang Tingyun, by the other missionary after Matteo Ricci, who was the origin of the rights controversy in late Ming. And because he had a serious discussion with Yang Tingyun, and he thinks that, oh, this is a kind of too far. Then they think that he's not a Christian, and they report it to the Pope. However, when we Chinese read what they have been talking, they're using so many Christian or Confucian terms. But actually, their theoretical framework, their cosmology, and their worldview have all been changed. That basic structure were Christian structure, actually. And he affirms the Trinity, the creation of heaven and earth by God, all these basic doctrines. And he strongly criticized Buddhism, and as well as the superstitious aspect of the folk religion. And they believe in science. So Yang Tingyun is one of the scholars in Confucianism who are humanistic, who focus more about the human aspect and not that go with, and they are open-minded, they welcome new ideas. And then we come to 18th century and 19th century. Similar. There are many other Confucian scholars like Yang Tingyun. And Qing was, because of the rights controversy, the Pope forbade the Christians in China to use Tian or anything related with Tian to address God, the Christian God. And also the Catholics in China cannot worship or cannot go to sweeping the tombs in the honoring their ancestors. So then the emperor in China was angry. So there is a ban of the Christianity, and all the missionaries who do not follow Matteo Ricci's strategy were kicked out of China. And that silenced the existence of Christianity in China until 1840s, the Opium Wars. And after that, in those contracts, it was stated very clearly that Christian missionaries can come and do evangelism and build churches. So from then on, Christianity was put together with imperialism. And people hated, the normal people, common people hated this. So it was very hard And also in 1922, there was a kind of anti-Christian movement, a strong campaign in China. The newspapers every day, they criticized Christian faith. And it was a hard time for Christians in China, actually. And then this scholar is also very interesting, Wu Leichuan. He's like Yang Tingyun, passed all the examinations and end up in the academy, Imperial Academy. We call it Hanling Academy. That's the highest place for all scholars, and there are great ministers coming out of that. So he's knowledgeable, well-trained with Confucianism. He doesn't know English. All his Christian faith or understanding all comes from his reading of the translated books. He's the one, he was in Qing Dynasty, end of Qing Dynasty, who was the high official, but later he went back. And when the new republic was established, then he became the Minister of Education for some time. And he became a Christian by reading. He has two friends who are Christian. And one day he went to see the friends. The friend said, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's a Sunday, we have to go to the church." And then he realized that's very serious. So he went to buy the New Testament and then finished reading New Testament in 3 days. And he doesn't like those miracles, stories. He just skipped that. He was attracted by the Jesus saying. He saw a lot of wisdom there. And so he kept asking questions. And then his Christian friend that, "Oh, you better go to church." So he goes to the church regularly on Sunday. And then a year later, he was baptized in an Anglican church. He then devoted himself in a lot of Christian activities. And in the anti-Christian movement campaign, he was having a lot of hard time because he's a very famous scholar. So he was questioned by his non-Christian friends a lot of times. That also forced him to reflect and to rethink about his own faith. It's very interesting. In 1926, he wrote a book. It's called Christianity and Chinese Culture. In that book, he uses, he said two parts. The first part is Christianity, and the second part is Chinese culture. He compared this Chinese culture and Christian culture and think that both have something good and something bad. And also he noticed that, Christianity in the history, because it was mingled or combined with this political power, ideological power, so it was corrupted and made some big mistakes. And so is the Chinese culture. So he thinks that, these two has good things. And if they can combine together the good parts, that'll be great. It is very interesting for him. He was also criticized by the many church people as someone who is not a true Christian, because he can't accept those miracles I've said. So he claims very clearly that what we have to believe or put the center of our faith is this Jesus, who has great high morality. And he himself, by doing and practicing, to teach us that our first vocation for this world is to transform the society. And for us to live in our life, to work, we should obey the truth, the core of the truth. So for him, we still remember that the 1920s is the social gospel period. The social gospels was quite active in China, and he voted for that. He was attracted by that. So he thinks that Christianity should integrate with Confucianism. We can't get rid of the Confucianism, but we should integrate the best part. And we have to use Christianity to create a new Chinese culture. And also he calls for the independence of the church, that he encourages that the church should be independent from their mother church in the West. And he calls for a kind of Christianity in China to be an Eastern religion. In his way, he thinks that the Eastern religion is that it's rational. and is scientific, and is more pragmatic, not just only, and he's strongly against that kind of religion or this kind of Christian faith that you only focus on your own interest, your own salvation. He always pushes the young people to devote themselves to the transformation of the society. And you should think that the injustice in the society, and you have to change it, do something. And then we come to the 20th and the 21st century. Then that's after 1980s, China, the Cultural Revolution, China reopened the church. And then it started very quickly, just maybe one night thing. You get the new churches built, the membership growth so fast. And then Bishop K.H. Ting realized that the quality of the church members is more important than the quantity of the membership. And so he caused a kind of reconstruction of Chinese theology at that time. For instance, one thing he talks about, a lot of misunderstanding in the West, especially in the United States, about K.H. Ting. They always call him a communist bishop. He himself would say, talk to a communist, saying that, I think a true communist can be a friend with a true Christian. So he is the one who calls for the cosmic Christ. And also he tries to say that, for China, and especially for Chinese people, if you only focus on the very strict traditional understanding of the justification by faith, or just make this faith very simple, that this faith is going to hell or heaven, it's not going to take Christianity anywhere. The Christianity will be like the other religions, Buddhism or Taoism, because retribution and heaven and hell are very common language for Buddhists and Taoists and the folk religious people. People all understand that. And if you just want to buy that ticket to the heaven by believing in this Christian God because he's more superior and more powerful than other gods, then Christianity will not make any difference in China. And so he's calling that rethinking and reinterpreting justification by faith in Chinese context. But I have to say, he passed away in 2012. And after that, he and his theology was almost forgotten. People do not talk about reconstruction of Chinese theology anymore. And he was highly regarded and honored by the Chinese officials, high officials. So he had a word. I have to say that he's very diplomatic. He knows how to work with the government and this political hour and made use of them. And he earned that space for the growth of church in China. Nowadays, you go to China, you see these registered church, we call them, everywhere, big buildings, beautiful buildings. And it is truly because of Bishop K.H. Ting and his generation. They have done great contribution. And there was, also in the 1980s, there was a Sino-theology movement. Liu Xiaofeng has been a very significant name, who wrote the book 拯救与逍遥 Salvation, and Xiaoyao, and it's a kind of comparison of Christian culture and Chinese culture, influenced a generation. And until today, it's quite influential. Sino-theological movement is trying to call that how Chinese can write theology in Chinese. And they have translated a lot of classical Christian books, and ancestors, church fathers, and that's a great contribution to the movement. And nowadays still on, but may have different definition. The other one is academic theology. I have to say that Zhuo Xingping is the head of the Institute of World Religions in Social Science Academy of China. He defended Christianity in many occasions. He's a communist and the member of the People's Congress. So he sometimes say, he writes a lot about Christianity. He almost writes everything. He published so many books about Christianity. And he is the one who was right on behalf of Christians to the government leaders that this is wrong, and your policy, if you do this, wrong. And a lot of times, you know, he's a great man, I have to say. Anybody you come to him and know him, you will notice that he's humble, kind, warm-hearted, knowledgeable. And then all Christians want to say, why not become a Christian? We always want him to be part of us. And he said once, it is very important for me to keep my position outside this door so that my word still can be countable. And from last year, I think spring of last year, there is a stream, anti-Christian again, a group of scholars writing articles and published on the newspaper. And they worry about this fast growth in China, because especially among the Chinese college students. And they did a kind of survey and saying that 30% of college students are Christians now. And in Chinese universities, almost all big important universities have religious study center or Christian study center. And so many philosophers and scholars, teachers are doing Christian studies. So they are evangelizing academically. It's a threat to our state. So scholars like Zhuo Xinping, they have to refute. And it is them who argued back. However, they actually were not recognized by the church. I mean, the church thinks that sometimes we try to monopolize the rights of talking about God. If you do not have the experience of God, you can't talk. So I heard Zhuo Xinping complain that, you know, she said, I was criticized by my communist colleague and also criticized by the church followers. You know, they think I don't have religious experience. And very seriously, because he was giving a lecture and a Christian scholar using the Bible, quoting the Bible to refute him. Seriously quoting, according to Corinthians, blah, 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 and this is wrong. And you don't have any religious feelings or experience. He was just laughing. You say, see, Buddhists also said that. Say, only because I don't claim that I'm any kind of religious follower, then you say that I don't have a religious experience. How do you know? And now the third scholar, Yang Huiling, and author of this book. When I said people criticize the Chinese academics are doing Christian studies, and he was also one of the target, because he's the vice president of the university, a very important university. So people would say that, see, like a vice president of the university, they do Christian study and they evangelize. I want to talk about Yang Huiling as communist, publicly claim he's a communist. He was sent to a kind of rural area in the Cultural Revolution at the age of 15. Stay there for 8 years and come back and become a scholar. He wrote books about Christianity at early 80s. He has a strong interest in Christianity. It is very interesting that he thinks himself as a traditional Chinese Confucian scholar. He was still he is that generation. I have to say that my generation, because I was born in the Cultural Revolution, and our education was kind of miserable, and my traditional Chinese was poor, I have to say that. Sometimes I have to read James Legge for the Chinese, the Asian Chinese. But his generation, they are still good. And because of Cultural Revolution, they didn't have school to go. And they read many books, Nietzsche and especially at that time Hegel, all the Hegel books they have read. So he was a kind of mindset, you know, he knows Chinese Buddhism. He got his PhD in a Buddhist Study Center, actually. So he's familiar with Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism, and also this Western philosophy. And he's interested in hermeneutics a lot. what's special about Yang Huiling is that he's a kind of scholar who thinks that humanities studies share the same core values with Christian faith. And he admired those theologians who are open-minded and also eager or willing to listen to his challenge. And what he's doing actually, he's trying to show that this kind of theological expression in the humanities studies, and as well as this theological concerns in humanities studies, as well as this express or explain theology through or across humanities. So that's what he's focusing on. I take one example. He's talking about the non-religious interpretation of Christian faith. Non-religious interpretation of Christian faith. And he introduced the Bonhoeffer's prison letters. And he's trying to say that, what Bonhoeffer has been reflecting in the prison when facing this human disaster in those ages. Bonhoeffer was claiming that God is not that kind of easy or cheap grace, that when people are in the marginalized areas and when you are weak, you just grasp and take this powerful God. On the other hand, the God is weak. The God is that you need to share God's burden. That's the Christian faith. And he likes this kind of explanation and the expression about Christian faith because he thinks that it is very similar to the humanities spirit, the spirit for the humanities studies. This kind of reflective and also always have the concerns for the poor, the needy, and the injustice. And that is also the core of the Confucian ideas. A traditional Confucian scholar, actually they all have this kind of burden of this transformed society, bring goodness to the people, to the community, and but the difference that they will start doing by themselves, we call it self-cultivation, and then they will expand it to the large community. Also, by saying the non-religious interpretation of the Christian faith, he's also arguing for him and other scholars like him, who may have not claimed their Christian faith, but they still also want to talk about Christian God and also Christian faith. The other thing in this book you will see is talking about the scriptural reasoning. It's a movement initiated by the Western scholars in UK and United States. It started by the Jewish scholars. They read scriptures with the Muslims and Christians together. These three Abrahamic religions, they share many things together. By reading scriptures together, they are increasing mutual understanding. And this is a way for them to do the interfaith dialogue. So it's scriptural reasoning movement. Yang Huiling was in touch with this movement in 2008 when he was invited to have a dialogue with David Ford, one of the founder of this movement. What attracts him most is this spirit in seeking wisdom. He likes this idea very much, and he brought it back to China very quickly. And what he wanted to do is that James Legge is a Christian missionary, Protestant missionary in the 20th. He translated almost all Chinese classics into English. And he later became the first Chinese professor in Oxford. He not only translated, actually think of that, he was a missionary sent to China to evangelize. But finally what he has done is only translation and being the principal of a school. He not only translates, he also comments. He wrote a lot of commentaries. And he is a Christian. So a lot of times by reading his commentaries and translation, we can see how Christian culture and Confucian culture being interacting with each other. So Yang Huiling's project is trying to study this interpretation and commentaries and to see how these two cultures interact with each other, then by seeing how James Legge, a Christian, a Protestant, read Chinese classics and his understanding of Chinese classics, and then we can see something that we can't see. Because you are in this culture for so long, you miss. And by seeing that, because this is a mirror that we can see ourselves from the other, that we can find something very valuable for our understanding of our own culture. So his scriptural reasoning is different from the Western or European ones. He is a kind of more focusing on this self-understanding and also the enrichment of different cultures. I have talked about the interaction of the cultures, their conflicts, tensions, all the time. And also I talked about the three scholars. I call them Confucian Christian scholars. No matter how people judge them, all of them, especially Yang Huilin, I can't put him into a Christian scholar. Actually, I force him there, you know. A lot of times people think that he is a Christian, and he would say, how do you define? So at least these two, the two previous ones, Yang Tingyun and Wu Leichuan, they're definitely Christians. What I want to say is that China is now having a very good, new start with this big number and with this opportunity. You see the pictures. This is the right one is my church. This is Haidian Church, Haidian Christian Church. It's a high-tech area and a lot of educated people. It's a long queue all the time, every time. We have 6 services every Sunday with a membership over 10,000. And they also have many branches, I mean. And this is a picture of the house church. Many house churches in China as well. So you can see that they normally will rent an auditorium or a conference room and for their worship service. So it's a variety, and it's very complicated issues. And there are also great challenges, also this integration of folk religion with Christian faith. When you go to the rural areas, it's more obvious. And people only focusing on the personal salvation or going to heaven. What I hope to say is that there are varieties, and I still think all varieties may have a reason. The problem is that how we can have each other and embrace each other and give each other space to grow. Because there is conflicts between even house church and registered church. They never talk. And they have bias towards each other until they meet a real human being in that church. And also there are conflicts between Christianity and the government. Still the government, I have said, the majority of Chinese think that Christianity is a foreign religion. And also because we are so cautious about this subversion of the state, and given that America has a huge power there, and they always think that there is a kind of hidden agenda behind Christianity. And they are afraid that Christian churches may be used by American political power. So they will encourage the growth of Buddhist temples, but maybe not Christian church. But still there are chances. I mean, our new leader, Xi Jinping, has been talking about to develop our traditional Chinese culture several times. So when we talk about traditional Chinese culture, people always got it wrong. I mean, they go back to the roots, or they go back to a kind of narrow-minded nationalism. However, in Xi's talk, actually, recently he talks about last year, November, he went to Shandong, the hometown of Confucius. He talked about the 4 principal points that we need to explain well about our traditional Chinese culture. For that 4 points, actually he's trying to say that China will do socialism, that's for sure. The socialism actually is rooted in our traditional culture, so that's something we need to dig. And China, this traditional culture has very unique heritage, and this uniqueness we need to embrace and cherish. And also this traditional Chinese culture is very necessary for us to develop. And then this traditional Chinese culture is not exclusive, but inclusive. He used a metaphor of Great Wall. He said people see Great Wall as a symbol of peace. They say the Chinese built the walls to protect them. They don't ride a horse to conquer the others. He said, actually, for me, the Great Wall is a symbol of inclusiveness. We embrace everything that comes to China and make them Chinese. So that's something we need to welcome, as a Christian. So interaction of cultures will have actions or effects on both sides. And if we can make good use, it will be good and effective. And also like Paul, I always think Paul is the insider of the Judaism. He is also trained in Greek culture. He knows Greek philosophy and he knows Judaism. He's a Pharisee. So he is the person who is doing something, constructing that theology, Christian theology, from within. He knows the best parts of two cultures, and he is the one mingle them together in such a good way. So for Chinese theology, we may have to do the same thing. So there is always good part in both cultures, and what we need to do is to decide what to take. And this job must be finished and fulfilled by Chinese scholars. Thank you.